Chapter 473. Of course, Thea couldn't say that they were here to collect some protection fees. Now that they saw that their spaceship was very good and impressive, they were fated to be with them. They planned to take it by force and use it as their base in the future. She pretended to be harmless and chatted with the squirrel-like ambassador for a while. She realized that they could communicate and the squirrel-like ambassador wouldn't violate the port's neutrality principle. There were tens of thousands of aliens coming and going here every day. Some had good tempers and some had bad tempers. He didn't have time to meddle in other people's business. After explaining a few things to take note of in a friendly manner, he left with his people. The guards seemed to be robots. They should be controlled by the main computer. Fiora kept communicating with Thea in the ring. "Don't worry. Arrange our people, Jared." Thea threw a banana at the head of the gorilla who was looking around. "Understand their organization structure. Control them from the bottom. Be careful and don't make any mistakes. Let the dead cooperate with you. Death Knell, you lead." Sia sized up Poison Vine Lady, Daddy Midnight, and Lightning Lady. These three people's combat power would be affected in the space environment, especially Poison Vine Lady. After leaving the plant and walking in space, she was already sweating profusely. "You take Electric Lady and the Yellow Lantern Corps to develop your connections here. Poison Ivy and I will return to Earth. Midnight, I want to take a look here and continue my old profession. I opened a small bar to inquire about news from both the black and white sides. Also, I can find a lot of magic equipment here." Old Man Midnight spoke first. The corpses that had exploded in the mud were pieced together by him. This unknown voodoo sorcerer insisted that the alien corpses could respond to his psychic arts and were of great research value. Thea thought for a while. It was not impossible. Now that her subordinates had the Yellow Lantern rings, it would be easy for them to return to Earth. Earth's magic world had regressed by 30 years because of her. It was useless to leave Midnight on Earth. "Okay, we have a lot of universal currency in our hands. We can take the money from Fiora to buy land and various facilities." No matter if it was General Zod or Sinisto, they were both rich people. Thea had ransacked their collections. Even by the standards of the universe, she was not poor. She wanted to slowly take control of the entire army. The entire process required both coercion and enticement. As long as she occupied this lucrative port and this trade alliance, loyalty and cohesion would naturally come. Investigate their main control computer. Brainiac is still a threat, so they won't develop artificial intelligence. At most, they'll use artificial intelligence. They'll create a few robot rebellions, and will help him solve the problem. After that, we'll be able to turn the tables. A few of his confidants knew about Gideon and nodded. Everyone split up. None of them were 1 or 2 years old, so they didn't need Thea to guide them step by step. The few people from Earth got rid of their initial fear and found that these aliens were not a big deal. Thea strolled around. Although it was called a port, it was actually a planet. With her supervision, she scanned the surroundings. There were very few residents here. The city was filled with various types of interstellar hunters, robbers, and mercenaries. There was no production of food or machinery. Everything depended on currency. She looked around and was slightly disappointed that there was no high-tech R&D facility like she had imagined. She left a few messages and returned to Earth with Poison Ivy. Thea returned to the metropolis first and found Diana. Only then did she know that Hercules had gone through another round of treatment. His own willpower was now strong enough to kill the tainted consciousness. He stopped after a little treatment. According to his original words to the Martian hunter, he wanted to rely on his own strength to defeat the devil in his heart. "Did your business go well?" "Too well." Thea didn't do anything from the beginning to the end, and the battle was over. The corpse of the supervirus was still not found, even with Croydon's compass. Perhaps the compass didn't know what the supervirus was. She had gained a lot in these 3 days. More than 300 loyal fighters, the corpses of Mungo and Sludge, and many of Sinisto's private collections. The two girls chatted for a while before Thea left the metropolis alone and found a secluded cave. She was going to absorb the divine essence that Gaia had given her. She was already very familiar with the order of changing the magic structure in her body. First, she suppressed the 5 elements in her body and relied on her body's instinct to resonate with the divine essence. If the first time didn't work, she tried twice. If the second time didn't work, she tried thrice. Thea was very confident in her own talent. To a certain extent, as the wielder of the sacred sword, she also represented the wishes of the people. The power of the people's hearts would help her increase her chances of success. Sure enough, after 3 tries, her body and the divine power had completely merged. Thea looked carefully and found that it was the earth element magic that she urgently needed. Earth, fire, water, wind, light, and dark. The 6 elements began to form a small cycle in her body. The remaining divine power of Gaia was completely absorbed by her and turned into magic. The cycle in her body began to cycle endlessly. Thanks to the purity and thickness of Gaia's divine power, her overall magic level rapidly increased. Halfway through, she pulled out the sacred sword and underwent a heroic spirit transformation. Her body was scattered and reassembled, and during this process, many remnants of Gaia's divine power were expelled. Thea's method was simple and crude. She reduced the divine power to magic and then broke it down and reassembled it. Whatever was not suitable for her body was discarded regardless of whether it was good or bad. It was only 2 days later that she finished absorbing the magic. She carefully felt the vigorous and resilient magic in her body. This wasn't an external object like the lantern ring. The power in her body was now the purest magic in her body. Perhaps there were powerful existences that could change reality at a higher level and rob her of her power, but those existences were still far from her. Thea had already done what she thought was the best. It seems to be a little more than I expected. After casually casting a few spells, the 6 elements were no longer restricted. The recovery and consumption of magic were also reduced by 30%. This was the benefit of having all 6 elements. At this time, her magic had already recovered to the level before she cut off her doppelganger. The previous problem of her body being stronger than her magic had been solved. Magic had once again returned to the top of her list of abilities. This made her feel quite gratified. Otherwise, it would be really embarrassing to be a mage who swung her fists every day. The increase in magic only guaranteed her future direction and height, but there was no qualitative change in her current combat power. She needed more magic or divine power. Let's not talk about whether she could win or not. The attributes of the gods were too simple, so it wasn't her best choice. Black Adam and Shazan were the 2 targets that she had never given up on. These 2 were rare people with balanced attributes. As long as she could obtain the power of either one of them, Thea was confident that she could raise her strength to the peak of the demigod realm. Chapter 474. After becoming a demigod, one would become a new god. As long as one could obtain the source, anyone at the demigod level could become a new god. It didn't have to be at the peak of the demigod level. Thea had never seen a new god before, and she didn't know the difference between a peak demigod and a normal demigod. She could only assume that being at the peak of the demigod level would result in greater achievements in the future. How to obtain the source had troubled her for a long time. If she didn't want to go to the new planet of creation, Revelation Star, and beg the Heavenly Father and Darkseid to accept her, then she could only look for the wild source. Zeus had been searching for it for thousands of years, and Thea's luck couldn't possibly be that good. Thus, she only had one choice left: to find the source behind the Wall of Origins. At first, she wanted to master the 7 emotions, evolve into a white lamp, and enter the Wall of Origins. Behind the wall was a light reservoir, the source of all the emotions in the universe, the life equation, and many of the source that Thea imagined to be hanging on an apple tree. This method was dangerous and uncontrollable. Kyle Rayner could enter after turning into a white lamp. Could she do the same? Kyle lost his memory after entering the Wall of Origins. No one knew if there was something affecting him inside. It was even hard to say if the person who came out would be Kyle himself. Thea wasn't a risk-taker. As long as there was a 10% chance of failure, she would be very careful. Fortunately, another method appeared not long after. With the help of the Holy Sword and her new talent, she could use the Holy Sword to communicate with the masses. By paying a huge amount of willpower, she might be able to change the rules and lure the source out from behind the wall. Many grains of sand made a tower, and many a little made a mickle. Eventually, the impossible became possible. This method seemed much safer than banging her head against the wall. Of course, the premise was that Sia had to do a lot of things related to order. It was impossible to hook up the source with the praises of hundreds of people. According to her own calculations, saving old ladies on the roadside and helping the disabled like Superman would at most count as a portion of the power of will. This level of savings would need at least 1 billion to hook up the source. There was still a long way to go. It wasn't just the matter of willpower. Black Adam and Shazam were still nowhere to be found. The clones of the little brat Billy Batson had been made quite a number. They could even form a wrestling team. However, old Shazam still needed a few more years to complete his mission. He lived in the subspace, and if he did not come out, no one could enter. Billy was quite easy to deal with. All he had to do was seal his mouth and have the clone with the voice most similar to his shout Shazam. After obtaining the power, he could gift it to Thea. That's right, it was a direct gift. There was no need for any ceremony or sacrifice. It was safe and fast, and there would be no trouble in the future. Black Adam was much more troublesome. Thea only remembered that he was sealed somewhere in the Middle East in the original spacetime. It was the famous archaeologist Dr. Savannah who found the place where he was sealed and released him. As long as he could find the location of the seal, things would be easy. Black Adam's strength wasn't bad, but it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't be looked directly at. She could set up a trap in advance. When he came out, a group of people would surround him and beat him up. After that, they would knock him out and draw his blood to clone him. The key problem was that they couldn't find him. Thea not only planted spies in Dr. Savannah's expedition team, but also in several large expedition teams near the Middle East. However, after spending a lot of time and money, they couldn't find anything. Everything seemed to be telling her that the time wasn't right. She still needed to continue to endure. When she returned to the metropolis, she immediately began the preliminary preparations to do good deeds. Faced with the dazzling array of various difficult and complicated diseases in the market, there was no panacea. Even if there was one, she wouldn't immediately release it. Thea chose 2 diseases that were considered to have a large number of patients to begin the preliminary research and development. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which was a type of motor neuron disease. Patients generally only lived for 2 to 5 years, and there was no cure. In addition, she chose spontaneous interstitial pneumonia. The patients only had half a year to live. The only treatment at present was a lung transplant, but the success rate was pitifully low. With her profound knowledge in genetics, she led the scientists of her own group to research for half a month. The 2 new drugs began to enter the clinical stage. Compared to Luther's advanced technology, she was only developing 2 special drugs. She was not afraid of suspicion at all. However, speak of the devil. She had just left the laboratory for 2 days when Luther came knocking on her door. Seeing that he dismissed his entourage, Thea asked calmly, "What's the matter?" Both of them were in the metropolis, but they adhered to the principle of not seeing each other. This was the first time she saw Luther since the Kryptonian incident. The madman who wanted to pull Superman down from his pedestal was a little emotional today. This was a little different from his usual calm style. "You developed a special drug for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, right?" Thea thought a lot in her mind. She didn't expect him to mention the special drug. Anyway, they had entered the clinical stage. They basically knew what they needed to know. In the future, they would rely on special drugs to treat patients. There was nothing to hide. Thea nodded and readily admitted it. "Can you let me see the current clinical report?" So urgent? Thea was a little confused. She didn't want to steal trade secrets directly. The 2 companies were so large that the market for 1 or 2 special drugs was too small for them. "Sure." Thea took out a thick report from her desk and handed it to him. She had no doubt that he could understand it. Luther could indeed understand it. He was also a person who had gone a long way on the path of cloning. Genetic science was not a problem for him. However, Thea relied on the knowledge of the entire universe and the Kryptonians. He had to rely on self-study, so there would definitely be blind spots that he missed. He read the first few pages of the disease introduction very quickly. He only paid attention to the treatment process and results later. Thea was busy with her work. Luther could read freely. However, it was impossible for Thea to serve him tea and give up her seat. The room was extremely quiet. Only the rustling of Thea's writing and the rustling of Luther's paper could be heard. My sister has the same disease. Luther finished reading the report and let out a long sigh. He seemed to be talking to himself. Lena Luther? Thea was a little surprised. The well-behaved little girl was still holding the shares of her new company. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yes, it's been a year. I also want to develop a new drug. But I haven't been sure. Your drug? Are you sure there won't be any side effects? Thea smiled. It's rare to see you so worried. Of course, I have my own confidence. You've seen the experiment report. I don't need to explain too much to you. Luther suppressed his excitement and said good 3 times in a row. He didn't talk nonsense and directly opened the door to leave Quinn Merlin Group.